Blessings to you in the name of Jesus Christ. This is Pastors for Pastors, the podcast that supports and celebrates pastors. I'm your host, Ken Broman-Folks, and we're back for a second season after a little bit longer break than I had originally planned. Hey, I'm retired. Time flies when you're having fun. I am so excited about this first episode of our new season because it is about a topic that has become an integral part of every congregation's and every pastor's life, whether we love it or are being dragged kicking and screaming into it. And that is our church's presence on social media. My guest is Dee Decker, digital and social media strategist for the Presbyterian Church USA. She works with churches to develop a comprehensive social media strategy. And you're going to very quickly learn that you are almost surely doing your social media wrong. In our first 10 minutes of conversation, Dee turned my thinking about the use of social media upside down, and I am sure she will do the same for you. Don't worry, though, because she also has some very practical advice on how to reorient your thinking and approach, whether you're heading a 50-member church family or a 1,500-member corporate congregation. The only other thing I'll say before we begin is that you are going to love this conversation. It's like you've joined a free workshop, so you'll probably want to be ready to take notes. So, Dee, I thank you for being with us today and really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about what is becoming a more and more important and sometimes pressing issue. Certainly seems to most of us that falls under the realm of what we might call evangelism, the way we relate with the world around us and have a presence in that internet world that we have. Would you start by just telling us what your title is and a brief description about what you do?
Sure. So my name is Dee Decker. I am the digital and social media strategist for the Presbyterian Church USA. I work under the Presbyterian Mission Agency, and I help churches understand social media and how they can leverage social media for, as you say, evangelism. Evangelism has sort of been a dirty word in the church for a while, but really it's just bearing witness. In my mind, it's just evangelism is nothing more than bearing witness how God is working in our lives and we're transformed by God's love. And so, being that social media is, the most, I would say, the fastest growing, and it actually continues to grow way that people are connecting and interacting with one another over the last 5-10 years. It makes sense that the church be involved in what I like to term not social media, but social ministry. So that's in a nutshell what I do. I also am partnered with Gail Strange, and we run the Communicators Network for the Presbyterian Church USA, and that's just a ministry that we have to come alongside churches, pastors, and communicators to help them, resource them, and support them, and help them do their jobs better.
What kinds of things do you do with churches? Give me an example of something that you might be involved in now in working with a congregation.
Sure. So one of the things that it seems that I do most, and that is do social media workshops, help churches understand that social media is more than just throwing stuff out on a social media platform. But we work really hard to help churches understand that you need to have a social media strategy and breaking down the components of the strategy, helping them to understand the differences in the social media platforms, help them to figure out which platforms they should be on and spend their time on, uh, figuring out where their people are on social media, listening to the social media landscape, So you could say that I'm sort of a guru or best source for churches in the Presbyterian Church to come and ask questions, and I love to come alongside them and resource them and help them with content ideas and answer any questions that they have. So I like to think that for me and my role, it really is a ministry, uh, to help the churches do not worry so much about the things that they don't know, but concentrate on the things that they know and resource and enable them and equip them to do that work.
Yeah, that's a big job, and I'm sure getting bigger as time goes on, especially with the
Absolutely.
limited amount of actual physical contact that churches have had been able to have with each other over the last couple of years.
Right. Well, and we found that churches, you know, eh, might have been prior to the pandemic, might have been slow to actually engage on social media platforms.
Hmm.
Certainly, we're slow to do online streaming. But in the pandemic, churches have been almost forced
Yeah.
into that world, and so it's a strange new land. I think for a lot of folks, to how do we do ministry on this social platform, and can it be effective? Can we actually connect and help people grow in their faith? And I think that what most churches have found is they may not quite be at the place where they understand how to do that effectively, but they have definitely, over the past couple of years in the pandemic, seen that it can be done, that social media is
Hmm.
a place where people are going to connect and to enter into conversations. And the church really needs to step into that world, so to speak, and learn some of the best tricks and the ways that they can connect, because this has been we have seen other churches or other nonprofits and other organizations really utilize social media to make change in the world, for good or bad, right? For positive or
Hmm.
negative.
Hmm.
And so the church,
Right.
if we say we want to be a voice in the world, and again, going back to what you said, evangelism, and bear witness to God's presence and movement in the world, then we need to utilize and leverage um, all means possible. And again, I think that most churches have understood over the last year that social media is, in fact, one of those ways that we need to embrace and learn more about.
For for those of us listening or watching that this really might be new, let's just talk about what social media means when you're talking about the ways in which congregations can reach out to the world. What platforms do you most commonly see churches using or recommend that churches begin
Right. So
using?
the thing I like to tell churches right off the bat is there's a difference between social media and broadcast. And a lot of churches use social media like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, you know, all of those type of, they use them to broadcast something.
Mm,
They're just
hmm.
sharing
Hmm.
their information to the masses.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of times whenever I work with churches, I will look at their social media, and a lot of times what they're putting out is, Sunday morning, join us Sunday morning at 10. Pastor Ken is going to be speaking about Mark 10 verses 3 through 5, and the sermon title.
Hmm.
Or they'll say, join us for trunk or treat, Sunday between 6 and 7, the kids will have, games and rides or whatever. And so they're just broadcasting
Yeah.
information. They're just putting their information out for
Mhm.
other
Mhm.
people. Social media, and I think most churches nowadays are using Facebook and Instagram or Twitter. But Facebook is by and large the largest social media platform out there, with over 3 billion users now around the world. It's still the largest in the United States.
Yeah.
It still has, uh, of course, it's skewing older now. We've all heard that. So what I see a lot of churches
Mhm.
do is they will have a
Right.
Facebook and an Instagram presence, so they can get the full range of their demographic that are in their church. But with any social media platform, you need to be social. So you need to invite people into conversation. And again, over the last 2 years, we have found that people really, really want to connect. That's what they want more than anything, is this connection. And so social media
Mhm.
is a wonderful way to connect with people in your church, in your community, in your state, in your region, in the United States, around the world. But you have to connect with them and enter into a conversation. That's what makes it social. It's not just saying, "Can come here this day,
Mm.
this time for this thing." It's saying, "Hey, um, what are asking a question, how are you seeing God work in your life? Or I have noticed over the last week that
Mm.
people are seeming more tired. I'm seeming
Mhm.
tired this off my week, and or over the course of my week, and am I alone in this? What are some things that you're doing to re-energize? Here's 3 tips that you can do, and those. So you're figuring out a way that your content, no matter what platform it's on, is seeking to enter in, not only connect with folks, but enter into conversation with them. So I like to encourage churches to use what I say is the 80-20 rule. And being a former pastor, whenever I heard that, 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. That's not what I'm talking about
Okay.
whenever
Yeah,
I
that's
say,
immediately what I thought of
yeah,
as a
no,
former
no, no.
pastor.
It's,
Right.
yes, completely different in social media. What we mean by the 80-20 rule in social media is 80% of your content should be inspirational or
Mm.
engaging, and 20% should be informational.
Mm.
So again, because it's social and because you want to enter into communications and connections with folks, it needs to be inspirational and engaging, and maybe even sometimes entertaining, so that people can
Mm.
comment on that, whatever you're posting, or ask a question back to you, or like it or share it or whatever. And that's what makes it social.
So to me, that is revolutionary right there in my own thinking. And as you said, I think the vast majority of churches just just use social media to do what you said, informational. Just join us for this or that, or we're having this program or this service, or this activity. You are invited. Everybody's invited, and it's just a, like you say, a broadcast.
Hmm.
To me, the idea of engaging in a conversation, if you will, that's that's eye-opening to me right there, and I'm sure it would be to a lot of other people. How do we begin to shift that? And I'll say alongside that, some of the Facebook groups that I am in, particularly one that's the
Hmm.
PCUSA leaders, I have noticed some of the most effective folks who post there post questions,
Right.
and I until you said that, I hadn't realized those are the ones that get the most
Hmm.
responses. What are the steps that you recommend that congregations take to begin to shift from just broadcasting information to engaging in conversation?
Right. So a couple of things, and I would say, from a pastoral perspective, we spend time each week preparing a sermon. And
Mm-hmm.
I know for me as a former pastor and now as a parishioner, a good sermon will be thought provoking. A good
Mm-hmm.
sermon will make us think about our lives, God, our faith, how we are to be in the world differently, and raise questions for us. So I think an easy thing to do for pastors is to either, over the course of the week, as you're preparing your sermon, and these questions come to our own minds, right? I know for me, whenever I read a text and I know I'm going to preach on it, the very first thing I do is write a list of questions that come to my mind. And so,
Mm-hmm.
one approach could be for pastors to, as they're preparing their sermon and questions come to their mind, do like a Tuesday teaser post where you say, this is, I'm going to be preaching on,
Mm-hmm.
Psalm 34 on Sunday. I'm not so sure that I can give thanks to God in every situation. What are some times in your life that you've had trouble doing
Mm-hmm.
that? Or do you think that this means in every situation, in the midst of death and grief and a pandemic? Those type of things. Or you could do a
Yeah.
Monday missed it
Yeah.
and say, okay, well, Pastor Ken taught on Psalms 34.
Oh.
He raised these
Mm-hmm.
these points or these questions. What do you think? Or a graphic with a big great quote from your sermon, or a graphic that has a question that you posed in the midst of your sermon. Those are all things, but quite like you said in the PCUSA group, um, questions are asked to spark conversation. People, by and large, whether that's in a group
Mm-hmm.
or on a page or whatever, they're not going to answer a question that isn't asked.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the first
Right.
step for pastors and for church staff members is to think about opportunities to ask questions. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing that I would say is, I'm glad that you brought up the Facebook group, because Facebook earlier this year actually completely changed their algorithm to encourage uh, people to start utilizing groups over
Mm-hmm.
pages. So, sort of the hierarchy
Mm-hmm.
goes family, friends, groups, then pages. So, churches,
Okay.
and it's not to say that you can't have both. Maybe your Facebook page is that billboard broadcast, right? This is sort of the way I look at the difference
Mm-hmm.
between groups and pages. A Facebook page, imagine yourself, you're driving down the road on your local highway, and you look up and you see a billboard, and you've got about 3 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds before you drive past to get some sort of message out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same way with your page.
Mm-hmm.
People are scrolling, 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 and if they come across your billboard, they'll look at it for about 3 to 5 seconds. Whereas if
Mm-hmm.
you are walking down a sidewalk and you pass by your friend's house, and your friend says to you, "Hey Ken, how you doing this week? What are you how's your dog? How's your wife? How's your partner? What's been going on with you?" And you say, "Well, I just
Right.
recently retired and I'm not real sure what to do with my time." And I invite you onto the porch with me for a conversation. That's your
Mm-hmm.
Facebook group. That's where you create a safe,
Mm-hmm.
and in my mind, for faith communities, a
Gotcha.
sacred space to, really have deep and meaningful
Mm-hmm.
conversations about life. It could be a Bible study. It could be something that your church is passionate about in, advocacy for justice. So a justice oriented group for your faith community. But that's where you're
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get those deep, meaningful, vulnerable, transformative conversations. And when social media is at its best, those are the things that we as the
Mm-hmm.
church
Mm-hmm.
are doing, right? Where I always thought as myself, and still do, as more of a tour guide
Mm-hmm.
through
Mm-hmm.
faith, even as a pastor, and now as in my role with the PCUSA. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just here to say, oh yeah, well, have you thought about this? And look over here, have you seen this? Ooh, and what about this and this and this? So, you know, social media is just a
Right.
tool for pastors and churches to ask those questions. Hey, have you thought
Yeah.
about this?
Yeah. The other thing that I'm thinking that I really appreciate about what you're saying is that, particularly in Facebook, you can have 1,000 friends on Facebook. Some of them you hardly know.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are your own family members. When you make a post just out there on your Facebook page that reflects what you're thinking, or questions you have, or what you're upset about, you may make yourself vulnerable to all kinds of attacks and bullying and
Sure.
nastiness.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a group, there are administrators who review what's going on, and there are rules about how you engage with each other. And so there's somebody that makes that, as you said, a safe and even sacred space where you can
Mm-hmm.
share yourself and what you believe, or how you feel, or what your questions are, without making
Right.
yourself subject to the kind of abuse that often happens when it's just out there
Mm-hmm.
for anybody and everybody to see. So that's another really helpful thing about what you're saying, and I appreciate that.
Churches need to be very aware that social media can be a very positive and uplifting and encouraging place. At the same time, it can be a place of
Yeah,
harm and great damage. If you're going to utilize and have your church presence on social media as part of your social media strategy, think through these different options of how to have your presence, how it can be a safe presence, and what you're going to do whenever it becomes unsafe, because it
yeah. Hmm.
will.
Hmm.
There's no doubt about it. It just
Hmm.
will. Now that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be have a presence on social media. It just means we need to be prepared for how we will respond and be proactive and monitoring, as you say, monitoring our accounts and looking for that type of behavior so that we can sort of nip it in the bud before it gets out of hand.
For sure. So let's back up just a little bit, and let's talk about strategy. How does a congregation or church leaders, how do they go from just that kind of shots in the dark, a broadcast mentality, to being an intentional and presence with a strategy? How do you recommend that churches make that shift? What are the steps there?
Well, I think the first step is to understand that a social media strategy is just a part of an overall communication strategy that every
Okay.
church should
Yeah.
have. And so that goes
Right.
back to your mission, your objectives, your goals, because that communication strategy is really going to guide everything that you do and how you do it. So the first step
Hmm.
is create a communication strategy. And again, the PCUSA Communicators Network, we're here to do that and walk alongside you in doing that. And that actually is a it's kind of amazing to think about, but that we do that for churches free of charge. So that is a
Hmm.
gift that we give to our churches because we want to be, again, we want to equip our churches to do their work. So, we can do a specialized workshop for churches or for an entire presbytery. As I said, my colleague Gail and I, we can do that via Zoom, or we can come hopefully after the first of the year in person and help you walk through the steps of creating a comprehensive communication strategy for your church. And as a part of that, look at your social media strategy. So once you have your mission and your objectives and your goals, your values, that type of thing, then we can begin to look at um, how do you want to use social media? So in light of your mission, what do you want social media to do for you, and what do you want social media to do for your congregation? And because it's both of those together. And then you look at, okay, so let's look at the landscape. And that means, what platforms should we be on? Where are our people? What platforms are they on? How are what are the capabilities of the different platforms, and how are they used? Which platform makes the most sense for us, given how we want to use it with our mission? Are we going to have groups? Are we going to live stream? Are we going to do social advocacy work? Are we going to do Lent devotions or what have you? And then you go into thinking about content and timing, consistency. What's our bandwidth for being able to create content? What type of content do we want to put up there, given our staffing or volunteer uh, position at the time? Can we post every day? Can we post twice a week? Can we post 2 times a day? What have you? um, and then we get into talking about metrics. How are we going to measure what we're doing? How are we going to know if what we're putting up is successful? How do we know if we're reaching our goals? And so we get into the analytics part of it. But I think a lot of times people just want a formula that they can follow. And there is no formula for social media and churches. It's because it's so contextual. Every community is different, every church is
Right.
different.
Right.
And to be successful on social media, and in any channel of your communications, you've got to spend the time in doing the sort of laying the groundwork.
What are some of the most common mistakes, and maybe you've already listed them with just kind of the shotgun approach of broadcasting things, but what are some of the things that you most commonly see when you're working with congregations that you say, okay, let's back up and address this first? What are some of those things that most congregations you work with need to fix?
Right. That's a great question. And it's actually pretty universal in what folks are need to fix, and that it's twofold. It definitely the broadcasting. That's
Mhm.
something that almost all churches are doing. Just putting information out there and not inviting people into a
Mhm.
conversation. Secondly, is consistency. uh, you have to
Ah,
post
yeah.
consistently on social media, not just, oh man, we
Mhm.
haven't posted for like 3 weeks. We need to put something out there. Um, Social
Right.
media definitely, you will get better results if you have a rhythm to when you're posting. And I will tell you, some people will
Mhm.
say, oh, you need to post every day, 4 times a day. You need to post,
Yeah.
4 times a day on Facebook. You need to post 10 times a day on Instagram. You need to, have so many hashtags, whatever. I mean, let's just be honest. For most churches, you're working with a very small staff. you're working with a pastor, a couple of volunteers, and a secretary,
That's right.
and you're trying to do 1,000 other things. It is not even within the realm of possibility to think
Mm-hmm.
about posting
Mm-hmm.
every single day. So don't feel like you have to do that. Just post consistently. So, as I mentioned earlier, have a couple of days a week that you can start off with. Whether it's, like I said, the Monday missed it, you missed part of the sermon, or it's like a Tuesday teaser. This is what I'm thinking coming up for this Sunday sermon. If you wanted to, pick up your smartphone and just do for part of the Tuesday teaser, hey, I'm preparing to preach on Psalms 34, and these are the questions that I have. And then instead of typing it out, just do a quick short, what we call a short form video, and put it up. Mix it up. Some days do a video, and some weeks do typing it
Mm.
out. Consistency is the key. That is
Mm-hmm.
going to really help keep it front of
Yeah.
mind for your target audiences and for you. And you get into this rhythm, and then it just becomes part of like your regular week. So the broadcasting consistency, and I think content, which really kind of falls
Right.
under, the broadcasting sort of falls under
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
content. You want your content to be relevant to your community, right? You want it to be asking people to enter into a conversation, and you want it to be quality content.
Mm-hmm.
So, spend a little bit of time. There are some free resources out there. Canva, canva.com. You can
Mm-hmm.
get a free pro account as a nonprofit um, to create graphics and
Mm-hmm.
videos and presentations and all of that kind of cool stuff that you can use on social media. And it is super simple to use.
Let's talk a bit about websites.
Sure.
We
Yeah.
almost have forgotten that that's a part of social media too.
Mm,
Well, how do you recommend churches to use websites these days? Who looks at them? Is it primarily
yeah.
folks looking for a church, or
Uh huh.
you know?
Yeah.
I remember we used to do it with lots of videos from the minister welcoming people,
Hmm.
and now I don't see any of those videos, or hardly
Hmm.
any. How do you recommend that we use websites these days?
Yeah. So, whenever we're talking about digital strategy, um, websites are a key aspect of your digital strategy. And I think the easiest way for churches to think about their website is to think about your website as home base. Think of social media as like your outpost.
Mm-hmm.
You're sort of, it's out there away from home. It's trying to reach a very broad audience, and everything that you do on social media should be pulled back to home, your website. um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
any e-news, so you have different channels. You might have your emails, you may have your e-newsletters, you might have a podcast. That could be like your media hubs. So social media is your outpost. Your hubs are, those type of things, and everything points back to your website. I really, and I will say, from 4 months isn't so bad for a church of being out of date, because I have seen, even my own church that I attend, we got a new pastor 8 months ago, and our old retired pastor is still
Uh-huh.
listed as part of the staff. That's horrible. We can't be doing that.
Oh my.
That's ridiculous. And we can't do that because the website is the first place anyone goes to find out any information about your church.
Yeah.
And that is your target audience. That's people who are not
Right.
currently attending or associated with your church at all, and people who are. So whenever people go to your church website, they're checking you out to see if it's a fit. They're going to go to your website before they do anything else. Um, it's the front door, so to speak, to your church. So it's crucial that it's up to date and gives, some things that you need to think about is on your homepage or your landing page. It needs to say your location, like with a Google map. It needs to say the times of your services. If you do live streaming of your services, it needs to be available right there on your home, your landing page. Your website should absolutely talk about your staff, what you believe. Um, a lot of people want to know about children. What are you going to offer my children? What type of classes do you have? Um, Obviously your mission statement should be on your landing page. I cannot overemphasize the importance of a good website, and again, that could be its a whole nother podcast because it's critical, and the components that you need to have. And again, it goes back to bearing witness to the world.
Right.
People are going to want to see how are you. That's a tool of evangelism, and they're going to want to see, who are you, what do you believe, and frankly, what are you going to do for me and my community. The latest research says within the first 10
Yeah.
to 15
Yeah.
seconds they'll make a decision about your church based upon your website.
The ones that caught my interest were the ones that first of all uh, had a look that was pleasing
Mm-hmm.
to the eye. It's just
Yep.
psychology. It's just the
Yep.
way we work. If it's not pleasing to the eye, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
not look at it. But then had, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm new here button to click that then talked
Right.
about what about my
Right.
kids? What do I need
Right.
to know? What do
Right.
I wear?
Right.
What
Right.
time, where? When somebody's looking for a congregation to, maybe they moved into the community, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're not happy where they are, or maybe they're kind of wanting to have a sense of wanting to get back into
Mm-hmm.
something that they've
Yep.
gotten away from. They're going to go to
Yep.
Google, and they're going to Google
Mm-hmm.
churches of whatever
Right.
criteria.
And one thing, it is absolutely the first thing that people will look at is the appearance,
Hmm.
because yeah, I mean that's just the way that we're wired,
Right.
and part of that is it too cluttered?
Mm.
I've seen a lot of church
Yeah.
websites that they feel like we have to put everything on the front page because
Right.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
doing is important, and so we've got to get everything there. And
Yeah.
I that will work against you every time. It's much better to have a website that's easy to navigate and very intuitive, user friendly. You want a really good user experience, and part of that user experience is that it's a clean, what we call a clean, uncluttered look, easy to navigate, and has the answers to the questions people are looking for. The
Mm-hmm.
80/20 rule comes up a lot in my life, but if 80% of the people are going to want to know the information, that garners a
Right.
look on
Right.
the front page
Yeah.
of your website. If only 20% of the people are going to be impacted by whatever it is, then don't
Mm-hmm.
put it on the front page because
Mm-hmm.
that's just
Mm-hmm.
clutter.
Right. One thing you said a little while ago that I wanted to follow up on is the use of humor in our social media posts. How, you know, I don't know why it shouldn't be this way, but churches and humor seem to have this antithetical relationship. How would a church use humor in their social media?
So I think that churches could really do well if we just didn't take ourselves so seriously and maybe relax a little bit. I think we can learn from Jesus. Jesus had a sense of humor. I think he had a little snark
Yeah.
in him too, which I love. So some ways that you can do that on social media is, memes are a really good way to do that. Little graphics that kind of poke fun at us and some of our, just to show that we don't take ourselves too seriously. And I think that a lot of folks are
Mhm.
really put off by that. Like, oh, you guys at church, you think you have it all together.
Mhm.
I certainly wouldn't fit in. Um,
Yeah.
uh, so memes are a great
Yeah.
way to do that. You know, there's all in culture. There's all kinds of video clips and pulling from pop culture that we can utilize in a humorous way. I just put something on the Communicators Network Facebook group about, it was a close up of a bird that was flying through the air, and the bird just looked like completely calm, very surreal, I've got this all together kind of feeling. And the caption was something along the lines, when you think everything's falling apart, the
Mhm. Mhm.
Holy Spirit swoops in to let you know, don't worry, I got this. Those kind of things are a little bit humorous, but also like, ooh, yeah, I needed to
Mhm.
hear that
Mhm.
today kind of thing. And I think the church would do well, again, to just, sort of say, listen, we we're not serious all the time, and you don't have to have it all together, and be straight laced and uptight to fit in here. We're just people trying to figure out how to do good in the world and love God more.
I don't know why it is that uh, we think we have to be so serious. I mean, certainly we're talking about spiritual issues of great depth.
Right.
I picture when Jesus says, it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle. I think there was some humor in the way
Oh.
he spoke that. I picture a little bit of snark or a smirk on his face
Hmm.
when he says that. I agree with you, and I wish we would be more lighthearted in our approach to the faith. And
I think churches need to show that we are made up of people who are not perfect, that are human and struggling just like everybody else in the world. Um, and and we would love for you to join us on this journey of figuring out how to love one another and love God more.
my sense is that the folks who might not have been involved in the church for a while, or maybe never, who have some kind of spiritual draw, a call, a sense of being led, and are looking for something. That sense of, yeah, we're a group of people who believe, and yet help me with my
Hmm.
unbelief, um, uh, struggling with faith and how to live out that faith. If we're willing to be vulnerable, those just might be the people that
Right.
we're going to
And
reach.
and you know, I had a seminary professor tell me one time, it's not the people who have questions or doubts that scare me the most.
Hmm.
It's the people who have all the answers.
Mhm, mhm.
I think that the church has sort of marketed itself, willingly or not, knowingly or not, as we're the place with all the answers. And people don't buy that anymore.
They don't buy that. No, no, it turns them off.
I think people are looking, especially after the last 2 years, they're looking for authenticity and connection. If a church can be authentic about who they are, because every church is different, every church is made up of different people with different ideas and different goals and different theologies and different takes on how to do different things. Be authentically yourself in a way that is open to
Yeah,
connections, no
yeah.
matter how they come, whether that be, people walking in the door to attend worship, or walking into your food pantry, or walking into your youth group, or, connecting with you on your Facebook page or your Facebook group, whatever it is. Be authentically who you are and always be open for making a connection and then have a next step for that person. What's the next step you want them to take, both physically and digitally? But yeah, people want authenticity and connection more than anything at this point of time in our world.
I agree with you, and I think that kind of summarizes what we've been saying in this great conversation, which has gone in wonderful ways that I didn't anticipate. But you kind of blew my mind right at the very beginning by suggesting that our whole presence on social media should not be a broadcast of the things we're doing, but an invitation to engage in a conversation about uh, our own spiritual journey, if I can use a rather overused phrase. But and I appreciate that. If we go away from this with nothing else,
Oh.
then rethinking of what our reason for being uh, present in social media, I think that could make a huge difference in most. Like you said, this is something that almost all congregations need to
Mhm.
fix. That sense of
Yeah.
broadcast rather than
Well, and
conversation.
it goes back, like I said earlier, it goes back to what is your, your communication strategy, which all begins with what's your mission? What's the purpose of your church?
Mm-hmm.
If the purpose of your
Mm-hmm.
church is
Yeah.
to love God and love others, then, don't you want to use every means available to you to do that? Well, sure. If your purpose
That's right.
is,
Yeah.
something else, don't you want to use all means available to do that? Absolutely. And the great thing about social media is it's, for
Right.
the most part, free, and it has a very wide reach.
Yeah. And I also appreciate what you said about the fact that it doesn't have to be a huge thing because, as you mentioned, there are tons of churches. In fact, in our denomination, the majority of churches are under 100 members,
Right.
and so there's nobody who has the time to be full-time social
No.
media engaged. But a couple of things, a half hour, 2 days a week
Hmm.
of engaging in this. I love the title "Missed It Mondays" and Teaser Tuesdays. Um, just a couple of those things that we can do
Right.
consistently will make a
Yeah.
huge
Because it's just
difference.
tie into the things that you're already doing. You're
Hmm.
already doing a sermon every week.
Right.
You're
Right.
already singing songs every week. So what if
Yeah.
you knew that you were singing this hymn on Sunday morning? Make a quick graphic with the chorus or a line that really speaks to you. I mean, hymns have some great lines.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That'll get you every time. You're already doing those things. Just take
Right.
a little bit of extra time and see how it goes. And when you're posting that line from the hymn, say this is from "It
Yeah.
Is Well with My Soul." Um,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
is your soul today?
Or
You
when
know,
his name escapes me, said, "Amazing grace that saved a wretch like
hmm.
me." So when do you feel like a
Right?
wretch?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he didn't feel like a wretch all the
Hmm.
time, but when he wrote that, he
Yeah,
did. And
yeah,
yeah, sometimes we feel
yeah.
that
And
way
are you
too.
stuck in your
Yeah. Yeah.
wretchedness? Because
Yeah.
that's not the point of that
That's not
song, right? The point of the song is,
that's not the message of
hey,
that
you're
song.
loved.
Right.
It's hopeful. Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, there's just tap into what you are already preparing and working on, and put it out
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
as best you can on a consistent basis.
Excellent. This has been
Well, thanks
so
for
helpful
having
and
me.
enjoyable too. I thank you,
Yeah,
Dee,
for
for your
sure.
time. This has been fun and really eye opening. I'm sure it will be very helpful to many folks who listen. So thanks again for taking the time to do this. And
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. It was great.
I have to share this story. The day after we recorded this conversation, I posed a question on my personal Facebook page. Not a picture or a video or a share of someone else's post, just a question. And in less than 24 hours, I received 63 comments, not likes, but actual comments in which people shared something of their own spiritual journeys. It was amazing, and a testimony to the truth of what Dee had to say. My thanks again to Dee. By the way, if you are not Presbyterian but belong to a mainline denomination, check with your national office. I'll bet they have someone pretty close to being like Dee. Next time, we will have another very important conversation, but in a different vein. I'll be talking with Dr. Ed Treat, the director of the Center of Addiction and Faith, about the pressing issue of addiction in our churches and in becoming more aware of addiction and how to be more effective in our ministry to those struggling with it, either in themselves or in a family member. You won't want to miss it. Thanks again for joining us, and thank you for your leadership in Christ's body. Until next time, I'm Ken Broman Folks, and this is Pastors for Pastors.